this point, first impressions of a Final Fantasy game were experienced at home. Whether it was grinding through Final Fantasy IV during a sleepover with friends or passing a controller back and forth in 6, those initial experiences were mostly had on a couch in a limited yet intimate environment. And not a bad thing per se. I truly think that's part of why early games are so beloved, but that's just the way it was. But when Final Fantasy VII hit North American shores, the exposure was everywhere. Like we said last week, from demo discs to in-store kiosks, fans were getting their first taste of Cloud, Barret, and Tifa in a variety of ways, and as a result, walked away with a variety of different reactions. So let's discuss. On this episode of A Gamer Looks at 40, we talk about those beautiful first impressions of Final Fantasy VII and see if the game actually lived up to those lofty expectations. Time to run to our local game store, get in the queue for the free play kiosk, and hope the store owner doesn't kick us out before we take on the Scorpion Sentinel as we ramp up episode 120, Final Fantasy VII Part 2, Intros and First Impressions.
Beyond the edge of reality lies a story of ultimate conquest, a story of war and friendship, a story of a love that can never be, and a hatred that always was. And now, the most anticipated epic adventure of the year will never come to a theater near you. Final Fantasy VII.
PlayStation.
Starting us out on our exploration into the intros is Matt and Geoff of the Fun and Games podcast. If you've never listened to these two, please start. Like, I'd be okay if you just turn this off and do that. That's perfectly fine. They're an incredible podcast that covers a wide swath of gaming topics. So let's see what they have to say about their first brush with Final Fantasy VII.
I had never played a Final Fantasy till 7. I had played other RPGs. Chrono Trigger, to this day, my favorite game of all time, was one of the first I ever played. And then Super Mario RPG shortly after. But even though it had the words RPG in it, I didn't really know what that meant. I just knew it was a game that was kind of turn-based and you could like pick power-ups and like didn't know that was like a line of kinds of games. I just knew these games did that. And it wasn't until a friend of mine who got a PlayStation before me also got Final Fantasy VII. And he, my friend Matt, I have many friends named Matt. No, it's never confusing. He was an old school Final Fantasy fan and like a big RPG fan. And so he bought it. And I must have watched him play like half the game. Like we just sat at his mom's house and I watched him play. And then I would get a PlayStation much later on. And when I did, one of the first games I got was Final Fantasy VII, and I became consumed by it. So I didn't get it at launch, but I don't know. I assume I didn't get it far after launch because I definitely got it before Brave Fencer Musashi and the demo for 8 came out.
Okay, right. That's when that demo came out, yeah. What about you, Geoff?
So, I definitely am a long-standing Final Fantasy fan in that I played the first one, and then I didn't have a Super Nintendo. But I remember seeing Final Fantasy VII on the cover of a GamePro magazine at Blockbuster Video and needing to get it. It was Final Fantasy. Oh my God. And the characters looked so cool. Does that guy have a gun on his arm? And how big is that sword? It was so cool. And a friend of mine whose house I usually hung out at when we would play games, he was a big fighting game fan. And so he got Tobal number 1, which had the demo disc for Final Fantasy VII. And that friend still isn't a big RPG player, but we played that demo so many times. I borrowed the demo from him. He wouldn't lend me Tobal number 1, but he lent me that demo because he didn't care that much. So I played it over and over again. I got a PS1 for Christmas of 1996, and Christmas of 1997, I got 3 games. Crash Bandicoot 2, which I played some. Star Wars Masters of Terraskazi, which I played more than it deserved. And Final Fantasy VII. And those other 2 games I didn't get to until around March of 1998, because once I started Final Fantasy VII, it was over. It was incredible. So I played it, I know it came out in September of 97, so it wasn't on launch, but I was pretty on the cusp on that. I made friends because of Final Fantasy VII. It was a big one for me.
That's cool. I love that, and I think that's really neat that you guys approach it from different ways. The demo disc. I'm going to do an episode on demo discs at some point because they were so crucial. And I was not a PlayStation person. I was a Nintendo fanboy through and through. Final Fantasy VII going to some weird Sony Play thing. What? That wasn't great. I was so upset that I never played it until like maybe 10 years ago, just on the PS3. Just like I gotta fill this hole in. But I love hearing people who played it of its time because there really was nothing like it out there. Like there was nothing, even in the PC gaming space. Not really. What was your first impressions when you played it?
So, I mean, it's funny you mentioned that you were a Nintendo fanboy because Geoff and I are huge Nintendo fanboys, and I was through and through. My first console was an NES. Well, technically it was an Atari 2600, but like those games were fine. My first console, the one I wanted, was a Nintendo and then an SNES, and then I would get a Genesis, and like I would go back and forth for a lot. But I had an N64 first. It's also why I got a PlayStation late because I wanted the Mario machine. But like my first impression of Final Fantasy VII was just it felt unreal in this fact that like I'm sitting here with my friend on his couch and we're seeing these FMVs, these full motion videos, and it was like, this is a movie. I'm watching a movie in a video game. That's so weird. And I was kind of just blindsided by it. I was completely enamored with it. And like, you know, I think Chrono Trigger I cite a lot as my favorite game for a lot of reasons, but one of those was storytelling. Like Chrono Trigger taught me that you could tell in depth, very sad, very impactful stories. But there was nothing like Final Fantasy VII. Like, I think I was just incredibly impressed by how different it was from anything I had played before. And like that opening train scene, like it's why when you get to do it and remake it, like my jaw drops because that was like a pipe dream. Like we would never get that. And then we did. But like even the original 7, which I replayed on Switch several years ago, I think probably when remake was announced, I bought it on Switch and replayed it. And like that opening scene still gives me chills, even on the PlayStation version or this Switch version, which is based on the PlayStation version. And so like, I think there's just spectacle. The word I would use to describe my early impressions of Final Fantasy VII is spectacle.
I definitely had early senses of total wonderment about playing it because for me, I didn't have any home 16-bit consoles. I played them at friends' houses, but went from NES to PlayStation 1 in my house. And yes, Matt and I are both big Nintendo fans, but I am, for the PS1, I am utterly a devotee now and forever. It hit at just the right time. I mean, Christmas of 1997, I was 11 years old. So that is exactly the perfect time for that. I'm gone. I'm gone.
You're done.
This is mine forever now. And everything else is a disappointment in chasing that high. As a games journalist, I have learned to temper that feeling, but that feeling has never left. And the idea of wandering around, not just after that initial bombing mission, which I've done many times, first watching it on Rebirth, I wept openly, genuinely. But after the fact, making your way back, all the little short FMVs that happened when you made it back to Sector 7 and wandering the beginner's hall and getting to learn all of the little nuances of the game, the way that it had all of the arrows to tell you what to interact with and where to go, that level of 3D interaction, because this was unequivocally the best 3D PS1 game that I had up to that point. I mean, at that point, I was playing like Strike Point, that helicopter game. I had Grid Runner, which was kind of a capture the flag game. You know, Final Fantasy VII was just an utter sense of what was possible in terms of spectacle, in gameplay, in character design, and all these other things. And at the time, I don't think it was best in class in any of those, but it was best in unifying all of those elements and giving them to us. And so that's the part that definitely holds up when you go back to it, I think.
I totally agree with that. And you both mentioned that first opening series. I recently replayed it for this series, and like you said, Matt, it holds up.
Yeah,
like it totally holds up. It is one of the best. And again, I have my favorite Final Fantasies, and 7 is not among them, but it's one of the best openings in the entire series, like an entire franchise. It is expertly paced, and it's something of which I had never seen before. And I remember seeing that demo disc. I had a friend who had the demo disc. We played that opening level, and I was very jealous of his PlayStation, that dumb Sony thing. And I remember watching it, and I remember thinking, this is totally different than Final Fantasy 6 or 4, of course, 2 and 3 at the time. This is something different in kind. And when I think about it now, I feel like the game grew up with gamers. Like, I was 17 when that came out. So for me, I was right at that height where I was kind of aging out. I wasn't into Pokemon. I was getting into college. You know, I was kind of aging out of a few things. And Final Fantasy VII felt like a game that was designed for someone of my age and older in mind. What was your takes on that? Being, again, Geoff, you were 11, and Matt, I'm not sure how old you were when you played it. If you're,
I was born in 83, so I was 14.
Okay, so 14.
Yeah.
So okay,
yeah. I mean, being the edgy teenager that I was, you know, a goth, wearing Janko jeans and a lot of black t-shirts.
Yes! Let's go.
Heavy metal head. I'm way more well-rounded now. When you become queer, like you gain access to the other music auras. It's just when you're a closeted kid, you don't know any better.
I don't know. In my experience, I just got gother.
That's true. But like, yeah, I think for me, it was funny because I was a teenager, shopped at Hot Topic, and like, these characters are cursing. Like, we obviously can't read the curses, but like, we're seeing symbols. Like, they're cursing. It's an adult like narrative. There's death. Like, I think that the game, I mean, there's a little bit of edginess to it, right? Cloud is very much a predictable protagonist now, especially since so many others have come. Like, Cloud walked so Clive could run, and I love when Clive runs. Anyway, but like, there was definitely this like teenage like oeuvre to it, right? From the music to the style, the steampunk world, the weapons. Like you said, a character had a goddamn gun arm. It's like, it just was unheard of. Like, you know, the last character I knew that had a gun arm was Mega Man, and he definitely, as badass as he was not Barret. And so, like,
Mega Man doesn't curse.
No. And so, like, yeah, I think that I agree. It was definitely, I was like the right time for me. I was becoming a teenager. I don't know that I ever aged out of the other stuff, but I was definitely looking for more adult and kind of edgy and moody, depressing stories, right? And this game definitely had that for sure.
And as an 11-year-old, I was also looking for edgy, seemingly adult stories, just in a different way.
Right.
Like, you never leave that behind. And it is something so funny to look at Cloud and say, what a predictable protagonist, because Cloud set the mold for so many others. Yes. Up until that point, it is very reductive to say, oh, RPGs didn't have twists. RPGs had twists all the time. The very first Final Fantasy had a twist to it.
Yep.
But most of the twists happened either in the story or your relationships with other characters. Rarely before and I'm only saying that to cover my butt. I don't think really this happened much before, where the twist was your relationship to your point of view character. Right. You could always trust who you were. In Final Fantasy IV, you start off as a Dark Knight, and this sucks, and I'm going to become a Paladin. We go on that journey together. When you start as Cloud in Final Fantasy VII, you are already on a terrorist mission. You are saving the planet. You are a badass. No one else can lift that sword. You lift that sword. And then all of that gets yanked out from under you in the second disc. And so that was absolutely mind-blowing to me. It was and honestly, its own edgy take as well. You think you know who you are? No, you don't. Stop it. Go down into the magical green juice that's in the earth and put yourself back together, so help me God.
Next up on the show is content creator and expert inspirer. I mean, seriously, check out his TikTok. He's extremely inspiring. My man's hitting the gym and doing all the things I don't do. So definitely give him a follow. The one and only Mekel Kasanova, as he shares some stories of his first encounters with Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, I can't think of an RPG or a game, honestly, at that time that I played that was anything like that. I mean, because at the time, like, I was ping-ponging between Samoa, Hawaii, and Memphis, Tennessee. We were just
Right.
all over the place.
Yeah.
But like, I know, like, in Samoa at the time, people, you know, just gaming in general just really looked down upon. And the few people that did, all they played was like MK Trilogy, MK3 Trilogy, or Killer Instinct. Like, mostly people had
fighting games and
platformers. Mostly because at the time in Samoa, it was primarily a Nintendo place. Out here, you had more people that were into a diverse set of games, just because, you know, Hawaii being so close to Japan and everything like that, and our population and everything. So like, you had a lot of people that, you know, some people that were pretty excited for it, but like, and a lot of adults are excited for it, but you had a lot of people that were upset, like you know, that like, hey, you know, but why did Final Fantasy and Nintendo just go hand in hand? In Memphis, people didn't care about it, as far as I knew. You know, when we would go to like the Funko Land and everything like that, or Babbage's, and man, I'm showing my age. Babbage's software, etc. Oh man,
yep.
You know, people really, like, other than people who worked at the game store, like, a lot of people just didn't care about it. But I mean, the marketing, like I said, with the commercials, like, they heavily pushed and marketed that. For me, like, when I started playing it, like, I couldn't really compare it to anything, because I was like, wait, I'm looking at the graphics for like Cloud, right, in the pamphlet. The booklet. Yeah, we don't get those anymore. But I was looking at that, I was like, okay, you know, looks really cool. But then when you start playing it, I'm like, oh, it's super blocky. At first, I was like a little thrown off by it, but I was like, okay, I'll go with it. And I want to say probably 2 or 3 hours into it, I just stopped caring about the graphics, because the characters were so well written.
Yeah.
That, like, it just felt like they were real life, you know, like real life people. And it just hit me. It hit me really hard, because the only other game I had played, only other PlayStation RPG I had played, and it was briefly because we rented it, was Suikoden. Suikoden, Wild Arms, and Beyond the Beyond.
Right. Okay. Yep.
And they just don't really hold a candle to. Oh no, I should have said that. Suikoden folks are gonna come after.
Suikoden is pretty. I mean, yeah. I mean, but even just from the cultural standpoint, just from an impact standpoint, it's not a Final Fantasy.
Right. It is. It's not, and there really wasn't anything like that out there at all. So. Yeah, it was just from many aspects. The gameplay, the mute. Oh my God, Uematsu was cooking on that track. He does on everything, but
yeah, right. But still, he was on point. Yeah, that's peak.
Man, just like every track hit an emotional note, and it just set the tone for the scenes. Mm-hmm. Like after your first reactor, when you blew up the first reactor, you walked around, you know, the city, and you get on the train, like just hearing that dun, 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 like this, I was just like, yo, it felt cinematic in a way. Like, looking back on it now, I'm like, yo, that was like nothing we had before, because most RPGs, I mean, you know, limitations of cartridge spaces for like the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis and such. Like, you wouldn't have as many tracks, but Final Fantasy VII just literally had a different track for different towns, different locations, different situations. Although I will say, I would be terrified whenever Cloud would have his moments where, you know, like he starts shaking, and then they had like that ghost like after effect that would happen. And the music would play. It used to freak me out heavy. I used to get scared because I was easily scared as a kid. My brother, Devin, and my other brothers, Nick and Tony, they used to love like, hey, Mekel, come over here. Let's go watch this movie. And it's Pumpkinhead. Or it's, something like,
Yeah.
just terrifying me. And then like when Sephiroth would show up, and I know a lot of people swear by One Winged Angel, and I'm like, okay, that's a great track, but One Winged Angel, for those of y'all who don't know, that song only played once in OG Final Fantasy VII, and that was when you fought him in his godlike form. Not Safer Sephiroth, but I forgot the form name.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I don't remember exactly, but I know what you're talking about. Like that is God form. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that was the only time you heard that song, but every other time he showed up, that other one had a horror theme to it.
No.
And it would like it terrified. And it didn't help that every time you heard that music or you saw Sephiroth show up, something was going down.
Yeah, he did not show up lightly. He came with the thunder at all times. Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah, all the time.
It was just terrifying because I'm like, yeah, I hear that. It's like dun 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 dun. I was like, oh crap.
It's going hard. It goes hard, man.
Sheesh.
You ain't kidding. I think it's interesting. I always like Final Fantasy VII, and again, I didn't play until much, much later, so I don't have the nostalgia for it. But I just remember that's the game when everything changed. Like when Final Fantasy officially, in my mind at least, grew up with its audience, for better or for worse. Yes. Right? Again, I'm 17 at the time, so I'm kind of getting out of the kiddie phase, maybe a little more edgy, 97. That sort of thing. And Final Fantasy VII always felt like, to me at least, this was the more grown-up version of what I've been playing since I was 9. And this is just from me playing it on demo discs or at a friend's house or going to the neighborhood Funkoland and seeing playing it at a stand or something, or a kiosk. I always looked at it and saying like, wow, this is more grown up. Did you have that feeling as well when you played it? Did it hit for you like that? Yeah,
it did, because it did feel like it grew up with me, and only in the sense of the presentation. Now, a lot of people swear by 7 being the greatest. Like I said, it's not for me. It's 6. I feel like 6 is a darker story. It has more character depth, and I just feel like, clearly because of like shifting to new hardware, there were limitations in how we can tell the story, because we can only do so much with polygonal, characters and such.
Right.
But the presentation I felt was, it grew up with us in a way. Yeah. I could definitely say that. At that time, I was not used to like memory cards. Like, because like,
yeah,
because I got my PlayStation in 96. We got it in 96. And like a lot of the games that we got were just the platformer stuff, like the Crash Bandicoots and like your Jumping Flash and, Battle Arena Toshinden. So like, and I think we had Ridge Racer. No, did we have Ridge Racer? No, we had Wipeout. So I was just, games I'm used to just picking up, playing, and going from there. So when I finally got around to playing Final Fantasy VII, it was just kind of crazy because I would play for so long, and then my mom was the I don't know if I said this in the last podcast, but like she's the super overly religious type. So you had the amount of time for you to, to be able to play. You had to pray and read the Bible, and so
wow,
yeah, okay. She's that strict.
She's into that. Okay,
she's very
gotcha.
I don't do that to my kids, but anyways,
it's all good.
But I would play for so long, and then she'd be like, "All right, time to wrap it up." I'm like, "I only play for like an hour," and so then I would see the things that said "save." You need a memory card, and I'm like, "Crap, I don't have that." So. For like the first 2 months, I literally kept playing that one part over and over, but I got really good at it because I was like, "Hey, this is Final Fantasy. I need to learn this stuff." Yeah. And so, am I going too far ahead? I can.
No, you're cool, man. Go for it. Just roll.
Okay. So, I eventually, like, I begged my older brother. I said, "Hey, can you go buy me a memory card?" He's like, "What's that?" He's like, "Why do we need that? Like, we're everything else. We just play and be done with it." I'm like, "Hey, I want a memory card because I want to play this game." And so he ended up going to get me a memory card, and then I think I got to the end of Midgar. I got to the end of Midgar right when you were on the bikes, the bike, the bike part.
Yeah, right. The bike part, and you're about to get into the game proper. Yeah.
Right. So I was like, okay, cool. And then, oh god, this is bringing up trauma because I hate my brother for this. So I remember, oh my goodness, I remember coming back. Like I came home from school and I went back to play it again, and then like I was like, "Where's my save file?"
Oh no.
Yes.
Oh, no.
Yes. Delete it.
No, why?
Because he's like, "Oh, how do I go through all this stuff?" And like he was just fiddling around with,
the memory card. Don't fiddle with the memory card. You can't do. So it wasn't like a malicious thing. He it wasn't like him being he's older or young. I think older brother, right?
Older. Yeah.
Older, right? So he wasn't just being like a jerky older brother. Let me mess with my younger brother. He was just feeling like, memory cards. I never had dealt with that and blew your save out. No.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I had to go get a Sharpie and write on it, "Devin, do not touch my memory card." Flipped it over on the bottom. "I'm warning you." On the side, "I still see you."
How rad would it be if somewhere that still exists, somewhere with that evil warning, "Don't you dare. Don't touch. Don't touch." Oh, that's funny.
Oh,
man, you're far in that game. You were a solid 10 hours easy.
10-ish. Yeah.
Ooh.
Man,
that's a lot more Bible verses, man.
That is. I'm gonna have to text him and be like, "I still hate you for that." He's like, I know how he's gonna react. He's gonna be like, "Bro, I'm 40. I'm 35. I'm about to be 36. He's 7 years older than me, so he'd be 42, 45.
Yeah, 45. Yeah, about that.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm gonna have to text him after when we're done and be like, "I still hate you for that."
That's funny, dude. That's so funny. I love that. Coming up next, we have two recollections, one from Michael K. Hughes of the Capes and Junk podcast and comedian Nate McClellan. What was your first impressions of it when you played it? Did you play it of its time? Was it later on?
I played it for the first time, like give it like a real honest try, probably 3 years ago.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Super recent.
Okay.
And yeah, it was fine. Like obviously the graphics are dated now, but what really roped me in, what kept me going is the whole thing I messaged you about. Man, I need to get on here and gush about the materia system because that whole mechanic was what kept me focused on beating the game.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the materia system is really good. It's one of my favorite systems, I think, in Final Fantasy. Yeah. But I can see how people wouldn't like it as much because it really became like they really distilled down the jobs of the previous games to really where every character would play the same. But you could, but the customization was nearly endless, and right. So I really appreciated it.
Because 6 kind of got that way too with the Espers. You can put any Esper on anyone and get the level up bonuses from that, so everyone could be doing everything by the end of the game. But this one, it felt way more customizable because you can drag and drop abilities and stuff like that.
Yep. Yeah, and it's again, this sounds like it makes me a basic RPG player, but for me, who's more casual in this I really dug. It was all color coded and it was just easy. It was easy to figure out, and I felt like I had a lot of control, even if I didn't really care too much about crazy customization and optimization. It worked well enough to get me through the story and get me through the battles, and that was good enough. So I really appreciated the materia system. I still think it's one of the more successful ones.
Yeah, it makes you feel like a genius too when you do figure out the synergies. Like if I put counterattack on Tifa, and then her melee attacks have a chance to poison. So when someone attacks her, she counterattacks and poisons them. It's like, oh man, I can see how this is going to be addicting.
I am a genius. I am the smartest person alive. Yeah, you're right. And that's a great feeling when games can help you feel like you are just the smartest person on the planet. Like you've cracked the code somehow. It's a really good feeling.
Finding ways to break the game in a way that the developers may not have intended is always a blast.
Yep. Always a worthwhile endeavor. Another thing about Final Fantasy VII, though, of course, it was the first time that graphics really became the forefront. I feel like Square got their hands on the PlayStation and the CD technology, realized we can sell this, 3 CDs, 4 CDs? What do we care? And just went all out on the visual spectacle. I think the game, from an art design perspective, still looks great. Yeah, it's dated, but it's an old PlayStation game. That's just what it is. But what's your take on the visuals of Final Fantasy VII?
Yeah, like I'm such a sucker for pixel art, so 6 is always going to be the tops in my eyes.
Yep.
But you can't help but notice the jump between 6 to 7, and even from 7 to 8, which I'm probably talking about later.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it was huge, and there was nothing like it at the time. So it's kind of like Mario 64. There was nothing like it, running around in that courtyard with the joystick for the first times. Yeah, it's dated now, but at the time it was the pinnacle of innovation.
No, 100%. I'd never seen anything like it. And as a hardcore Nintendo fan, who was a fan of Final Fantasy since the very first one on the NES, having my beloved Final Fantasy now on some rando Sony PlayStation station of play. What? I have no interest in this. So I never played it until like maybe 15 years ago when I was in my late 20s, just to like fill in the hole. So I don't have the nostalgia for it either. But as a hardcore Nintendo fan, it really made me jealous of my friends who had a PlayStation. It was like, man, the N64 can't do this. It can't.
Oh, yeah. And as a kid, we didn't know that those cartridges couldn't fit the same stuff that a CD could fit. Like, I don't know, one of those 64 cartridges might be able to get some of the cutscenes from 7 on it, and that's about it.
Maybe a fraction of the cutscenes. Yeah, there's no way the N64 would have been able to hang with that. It was just the limitations.
Yeah, because we see some of that with like Spider-Man 64 and even the Resident Evil 2 port. The concessions they had to make it fit on those cartridges it's crazy.
David, thanks so much for taking the time today to talk to me a bit about Final Fantasy, a series that you love, that's near and dear to your heart, as I understand. So, well, Nate, first give me a little information about yourself. Kind of where you're from, maybe what your first connection with Final Fantasy was, and then we'll just kind of start rolling from there.
All right. I am from everywhere. I was in the my dad was in the Air Force, so I moved around everywhere.
Gotcha.
And when we were living in Florida, one of my friends on base lent me Final Fantasy VII, and I had never played a JRPG or an RPG before then. Changed. I guess the games I play, because up until then, I was like, I played like games like action games, so like. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I don't want to wait for a turn, like that's stupid. Like the enemy can hit me. That's dumb, like
I want to play now.
Yeah. Like I gotta watch this stupid bar fill up, So until then, that was my gaming like history, was that, and then like racing games too. So
Gotcha. So before Final Fantasy VII, you were on base. You had a friend who lent it to you. Was it one of those where that was a game you were interested in, or was it like, hey, I have game? Because I had like friends like that too, where, hey, we have limited amount of these things, these game things. Here's a game. Just borrow this. I don't know if it's any good or not. Here. Were you interested in it, or was it one of those like random, hey, you have a game available, let's play it?
I had never heard of it before. And I was just like, so him and his parents played games together all the time. And they played like that was where I'd first seen like Silent Hill 4. And I was like, well, that looks cool. So then like we were just hanging out, I think at his house, and it got brought up somehow. Was like, have you played Final Fantasy? And I was like, no. And then he said, you need to. And like, I think we booted it up there. And then I was like, can I borrow this? You know? And then
nice.
Let me borrow it. Yeah.
That's cool. So when you play Final Fantasy VII, what about it? And I think you mentioned a little bit about this as we were talking. What about Final Fantasy VII got its hooks in you immediately? What got you as far as that game and just why you got so into it?
So there was like, it was just the look, the kind of like, I mean, now I know it's steampunk, but back then I'd never seen anything like the opening with the train, you know, and like Cloud jumps off and the music kicks in. Never seen anything like it. I was like, man, I want to know what this world is. And then you meet Barret, who's a man with a gun on his arm, and it's like, yes. I want to know like about you. Like, how did you get that gun on your arm, man? Like, that's cool as hell. And then yeah, so like the characters drew me in. And then, I mean, now as an adult, I can look back and be like, oh, they're, you know, Avalanche is like eco-terrorism. But back then, I was like, no, they're, you know, like, I mean, they're the good guys, but, you know, it's very like a different point of view, I guess. Like, I was like, oh, they're, you know, they say they're doing it for the planet. My dumb 9-year-old brain didn't understand that. Like, right. I was like, they got to stop the bad guys, you know?
Right.
So, but and yeah, that's what drew me in. No, you're fine. It was just the story, the character designs, and the world. Like, it was just immediate. And, like, I heard video game music before then, but, like, I think that was, like, that and Ocarina of Time were, like, the first kind of games that I played as a kid where I was like, oh, the music in this is, like, good, you know?
Yeah. Once again, time to say thank you to our wonderful patrons, starting with Philip Becker, Joe Coro, Terry Kinnair, Greg Stewart of the Player One podcast and Generation 16 series of videos, Games with Coffee, The Let's Play Princess, BT Goebbels, Lindsay Harney, Tim Knowles, formerly of The Elitist, Julian of the Stage Select podcast, the one and only Seth Sergil of the All N Media Network, and finally, the fabulous and never cantankerous Pete Harney. If you would like to join these captains and captainettes of industry, then please go to patreon.com/agamerlooks at 440. Check out the tiers and sign up today. And if you would like to support the show without spending a nickel, ratings and reviews on your pod player of choice are always greatly appreciated. I would just stop there? Do you think I would stop with 5 people? If you've listened to this show for any length of time, you know I talk to a lot of people. I have a lot of intros to talk about. So let's keep going. Let's keep those memories rolling by joining Eddie of the Boss Rush Network, podcaster extraordinaire Kyle VonKubick, and finally Josh of the Still Loading podcast. Final Fantasy VII, what was that first impression when you popped it in? At first, you had just seen it in screenshots. I'd love to go back to that moment when you popped it in. You get those opening cinematics. You get that opening mission. What was running through your head if you can kind of think back to that era?
It was learning how to watch an FMV cutscene. on in retro, because the thing about it was that I didn't own a Sega CD and I didn't own a Saturn and stuff like that, so I didn't know how cutscenes would play out with full motion video or CGI video. So watching and just hearing that do 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 do, just hearing that music and watching the camera move and everything was completely a new experience for me. It was just like, okay, I'm not controlling anything, but I'm being led into a new way of telling a story. Making it, giving that cinematic feel and everything. Like, if you think about it, the way that Final Fantasy VII opens, and pretty much a lot of Final Fantasy games, is that you get that cold open, kind of before the game starts rolling. And then, when it lands to where the train is out and you hop on off as Cloud, and then they give you the option to change your name. Cause like RPGs didn't do that. You couldn't change your name. I mean, besides Chrono Trigger and everything.
Right.
But I literally was just fascinated. Like, I kept everybody's name original because I wanted to see how this game was going to play out with these original characters.
I played the Mystic Quest, took me a while, like I said, played some other RPGs, and then I had a buddy, and we'd grade school, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, whatever, have sleepovers, and I remember he had a PlayStation, I had a 64, so I just wasn't into, the older kind of series of games. 64 was a little more kid-based at the time, and he brought over Final Fantasy VII. So we were playing that, and he was at Fort Condor. And for me, like, looking at it now, it's like, okay, that's just a small mini game in a big game. But that was just mind blowing. We played it for probably like 4 or 5 straight hours, probably till 3 a.m, stupidly doing absolutely nothing. But it's like, how does this, where did you get this? What is this? I need more of this. Give it to me. And he's like, oh, dude, there's a whole extra game outside of this mini game too. I'm like, shut up. Okay. So basically, after begging my parents as much as I could for the following, couple months till Christmas, they got me a PlayStation, got Final Fantasy VII. And since then, I've probably purchased every mainline game, almost on release date. Maybe not the online ones in 12, but I've played, I think, almost all of them at this point in my life.
The teenager era, that's when we find the things we fall in love with. And I think a lot of that is, yes, you're more emotionally aware, but also you're developing your own preferences. I feel like I have a 7-year-old son. He likes what I like because he's 7, and he has liked some other things too that he's discovering. But for the most part, I'm feeding him, right? But once he has friends in school and gets exposed to other things, when he's a teenager, he's going to start building his own preferences apart from me. And as a dad, that's really exciting. I'm like looking forward to what is my kid going to be into? That's actually really cool for me. So for you, what about that? You said it captured your imagination because it was such a deep and intriguing story and had all these different layers. Was there something in Final Fantasy VIII that connected with you emotionally, that you kind of emotionally grabbed onto and said, ooh, this is hitting me in a way that a piece of medium, or 7 or any Final Fantasy really, a moment in those games that connected with you on an emotional level deeper than, oh, this is kind of a cool story or this is fun to play?
With 8, I can at least give you an anecdote for 7. 8, I'm going to have to think on a bit more. For 7, it was the moment you left Midgar, because at that point, I did not know about a world map. The concept of a world map in a game was foreign to me. I had never heard of that before because I'd never played a JRPG or any RPG really prior to Final Fantasy VII. So when you leave Midgar, and you are, towards the end of disc 1, you're pretty close to the end of disc 1 at that point, and you have to go to that town of Calm, and all of a sudden you're like, this whole world opens up to you. I went, whoa, you're not just keeping me in this tiny little area. Like Midgar felt big enough. Like I didn't think Midgar was small. And then all of a sudden, like there's this whole world you can explore, and there's different towns, and there's different like characters and like places you can go.
And finally, rounding out this episode is my good friend from the Games My Mom Found podcast, the one and only Mike Albertin. So when you played it as a kid, you were going through the guide. What was the next time you played it when everything started kind of making sense? What was the moment of Final Fantasy VII where you were like, okay, this is either, and again, I didn't even catch your opinion on it as a game yet, but like...
I think I liked it as a kid.
Okay.
I don't really remember all the stuff from the initial reaction.
Okay. So when did you play it again? Do you remember like when you picked it up again?
Yes, that I do, because my first real girlfriend, she loved Final Fantasy VII, and she lived in Minnesota. That's the reason why I live in Minnesota now, even though she's long gone. But that's why I ended up coming here. But so she loved it. So at one point I was like, okay, I'm gonna replay this. So I ended up going back to it and playing through it I did this twice. For the second time I played through it, and actually, because I had never beaten it, and I had a list going on with me and a friend of mine who I'm still friends with, and we were trying to see who could beat 100 RPGs first. And so I forced myself through this, but I always remember the day I beat it, I was talking with my friend who was also playing it at his house and trying to beat it, and then I went to Red Lobster that night after I beat Sephiroth, all excited. It wasn't because I beat it. We were going there anyway as a family.
I was going to say, was that your celebratory dinner? Some biscuits at Red Lobster?
It was for me, but that wasn't the plan.
Go.
I just remember my mother like, "You almost done? We gotta go." And I'm like, "Yeah." Sephiroth just wouldn't die.
Oh no, you were being hassled to leave. Oh, you were in that situation. Oh no. I think anybody listening can identify with the being hassled to leave, and you're like, no, I can't leave yet.
No, and they were good about it. They knew that game meant a lot to me. So like, but I want to say I was either in middle school at the time. I probably would have been in middle school, so a little bit older.
Gotcha.
So it was a few years, and then when I was in high school, I replayed this again in 2006 for sure, because my girlfriend lived with me, but then she moved back to Minnesota, and before I could come, I ended up playing through this game again because she was playing through it also, and then we talked about it, and that was the last time I beat it.
So one of the things I'm picking up on here as we're talking about, I'm going to go back to Final Fantasy VII a little bit, because a lot of our recollections of games have to do with time and place. And it sounds like you were playing Final Fantasy VII and Dirge of Cerberus as well during a time period where things were, let's just say, unsettled. Might be a good way of putting it.
Chaotic. Well, FF7 wasn't chaotic as much. I mean, because my life didn't get chaotic till like 2006. So when I was replaying this, when I graduated in 2006. Yeah.
But still, you were replaying it because you had the partner that was really into it, or still is very, very into Final Fantasy VII.
It's her favorite game of all time, still.
So I'm curious if Final Fantasy VII is linked to that period of time for you. 100%. And if the answer is no, yeah, really? Okay.
It is 100%. It's probably a big reason why I have never touched it again since 2006. It's probably why FF8 was on the podcast before 7 is, and I was thinking about putting 9 on, or 5 or 4, anything but 7. Like, even though 7 probably do better for me. Like,
sure,
it's the same reason why Advent Children hasn't happened on the podcast, even though I've talked about doing it.
Same reason.
I think so deep down inside, I think it all kind of comes down to the same thing. That it's just hard for me to, even though like I don't care anymore, but it's just, I'm positive that if I start digging into that, it's going to take Mike back to 2006.
Yeah, and it doesn't sound like that's a great place to be taken back to. No, I won't push you on it. Yeah, and that's fine. And I think I just, because, and again, I'm not going to push on it, but I do think it interesting that how we kind of connect those time periods. I wonder if I think about games and time periods for myself. I'm trying to think of games that I used to play when I was in challenging situations. I don't really have a lot of those, because when I was in challenging relational situations, I was not allowed to play games. It was because I was not allowed. So I don't think I have a lot of those personally, but Yeah, I would love to hear your opinion on it now if you were to take that step, because I would really it'd be interesting to see how it reflects for you now that you are, 2006, 2024, but we're talking like 18 years removed.
Yeah, it'll probably
from that.
happen because I know I need to cover it on Games My Mom's on. It needs to exist in that catalog, and it's one of those games that I need to read and I want to replay. It's long, and I just don't.
It is long. It is long. I did not replay it for this show. I replayed a little bit of it, and then the Steam version I have I got bugged out of progression, and a little character wouldn't show up at the bar for me to talk to get me into this, and something screwed up, and I said, forget it, it's not worth it. So I've been researching it, like the story and such, and the story is actually pretty awesome. Final Fantasy VII, it's a great story. It's just told so weird and jumbled. It's very confusing when you play in the game. But if you watch like a chronological, like here's the story of Final Fantasy VII, it's actually fascinating and actually really cool and interesting. It's actually very neat. But anyway, I just find it interesting that you had that weird time period. Second episode down, a few more to go as we continue journeying through the memories and recollections of Final Fantasy VII. Next week, we're going to do more of the same, more intros and first impressions. We had so many, I almost put it in one episode, but I said, let's just break it up so everybody gets a fair shot at getting their stories heard. So that's what we're going to do. Next week, we're going to hear more first impressions and introductions. Thank you so much to Kev and Pete Harney for helping me cut up these interviews so they can be played on these episodes. Their help is so important in making the show happen. Thank you, thank you, thank you, gentlemen. Thanks again to my patrons for their patronage, and thank you for listening to this edition of A Gamer Looks at 40. If you want to connect with the show, I am on all the social medias, most prominently Blue Sky, TikTok, occasionally Twitter these days because it's a bit of a dumpster fire, and anything else is located at agamerlooksat4040.com. Thanks again for checking out the show, and until next time, just be kind to yourselves and each other.